Hello and welcome to PMCLounge.com. Today we are looking at a term known as GASP, Generally Accepted Scrum Practice. And I'll also touch a bit on the history of this term. How did this term came about and what are some of the GASPs being used in the Scrum world today? So stick around. As always, if you're into reading articles, then first link in the description is going to take you into an article on this topic over at our official website, pmclounge.com. So you can check that out. Second link is going to be a playlist of all the agile videos that we have done so far. And third link is going to be a playlist of all the agile videos that we have done specifically for PMI ACP certification. So second link, if you're preparing for your PMP exam and want to understand the agile part of the PMP exam, second link is for you. Third link, if you're preparing for your PMI ACP exam. All right, that being clear, that being said, let's get started. If you like our work, please hit the like button. It helps us stay motivated and create more free content. So let's talk about GASP, Generally Accepted Scrum Practice. And the gentleman that you see on the right is actually a big deal. His name is Mike Cohn, and he is the one who came up with the term GASP. Mike is one of the contributors to the Scrum software development method, and that's why I said in the beginning that he is a big shot, he is a big deal, he is one of the founders of the Scrum Alliance. Okay, so enough about Mike. Let's understand what GASP really is. So, a generally accepted Scrum practice is an activity performed by many, but not necessarily all the Scrum teams. So, if you know of certain activity that your team and several other teams perform, but it is not something which is defined by Scrum. It is not something which is part of the Scrum framework. That is a GASP. That is a generally accepted Scrum practice. A team that does not perform the practice can still be doing Scrum, right? So you don't have to perform all this generally accepted Scrum practices, right? And you can still be doing Scrum. Work in short time boxed iterations no longer than a calendar month. Now, this is not a gasp because this is a Scrum rule. This is something that is defined in the Scrum framework. So you have to work in short time boxed iterations, which should not be any longer than a calendar month. Some people say 28 days, some people say an entire calendar month. So it's up to you. But conduct a sprint review meeting at the end of the sprint. This is a gasp. This is not a Scrum rule. And whatever that I'm saying is from one of the blogs that was written by Mike Cohn, and that blog is where we got the term gasp from. So conduct a sprint review meeting at the end of the sprint. This is a gasp. This is not a Scrum rule because this is not defined in the Scrum framework. So can a team really be considered to be doing Scrum if they forego a sprint review meeting? Yes. And many teams do as needed mini reviews rather than a big sprint review only at the end. So if you're working through a sprint and your team needs to do, let's say, mini reviews every 3 days, every 4 days, every 2 days, right? You can do so and you can avoid the one big sprint review meeting towards the end of your sprint, and you would still be doing Scrum because this is a gasp. This is not a Scrum rule. So that's the basis of generally accepted Scrum practice. I hope that's clear. So some tools can be gasps. Let's say Jira is an example, right? A lot of Scrum teams out there, they use Jira, but does the Scrum framework specifically tell you that you should be using Jira? Of course not. So it is actually a generally accepted Scrum practice to use tools. And Scrum teams, they use tools for setting goals and they use tools for tracking them as well. Such practice is not part of the core Scrum rules, but they are still used by several Scrum teams because they are generally accepted Scrum practice. So when you're using these tools, these are GASPs and these are not Scrum rules. These are not part of the Scrum framework, but are very common in the Scrum world. I gave you an example of Jira. We are going to look at four other tools which we should definitely know. You it's okay if even if you don't know Jira, but these are the four tools that you should definitely know. So let's take a look at them. So here's a quick look at the four gasps that we are going to discuss today. Let's start off with the first one quickly. So user stories are basically customer requirements or user requirements. And these are important because user stories help the Scrum team capture what users need from the software, right? So whatever the requirements are, you are basically capturing it in the form of user stories. And once you have ample user stories, you can then build those user stories and you can release them in batches. You can release these user stories in batches to the customers. You don't have to create a requirement specification document like we do in the traditional waterfall model, right? You don't create an entire document and release everything in one go. What you do is you have a bunch of user stories and you build those user stories and you release those user stories in batches. Next is story point, which is related to user stories because it is basically the unit for effort. So how much effort is required in order to build or in order to develop a user story is measured in terms of story point. It is a way of figuring out how much effort will be needed to build a user story. Let's take a look at an example. So this is an example. You are working on creating a social media website. This is a user story which basically has two story points. That's why it says 2 points here, right? As a user, I want to respond to my friend's post so that engagement can increase. So this is an example of a user story, and this is the number of story points as decided by the Scrum team given for this user story. So that's how user stories and story points work. So what exactly is Poker doing in Scrum, right? We just saw an example of a user story and we said that that user story had two story points. But how did the Scrum team decide that this user story is going to have 2 points? That's where planning poker comes into the picture. Scrum teams, they use planning poker to get everybody think through how big each user story is and how it will be developed. So the Scrum team has a list of user stories and the Scrum team is going to go over each user story and they are going to think through how that user story will be developed and how big it is. So how many story points should be given to each user story. Now the team, once this is done, they explain their estimates while they decide the number of story points for each story. So this is something that the Scrum team is doing, right? This results into an agreement on both the approach for development of that user story as well as what the estimate for that user story should be, how many story points should be given. So that's something planning poker helps achieve. And we are going to go into details about all these gasps, right? We'll have separate videos on user stories and story points and planning poker and all that. So stick around, second link in the description. That playlist is going to have all those videos. So do check that out. The third one is task boards. A task board, which you might have seen in the last slide, is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically a board which has a list of tasks, and these tasks are divided into to do, in progress, and done. It could be to do, doing, and done. There could be several other divisions of the tasks as well. It depends from team to team, but this is a standard one, to do, in progress, and done. So that's what task board is all about. It's basically a quick and visual way to see what the Scrum team members are doing, where we stand, how many user stories are done, how many are in progress, how many are yet to be started, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's talk about the burn down chart. And this is something that we have actually already discussed. The fourth link in the description is going to be a video around burn down chart. But quickly here, burn down chart helps you figure out how much work is done and how much of it is left. So whatever that you have done versus whatever that is pending, it's basically a visual way, a visual representation to figure that out, to quickly look at where we stand as of today, right? this also gives you a sense and an idea of whether or not you will finish the planned work, right, in the given time, in the given sprint. So this is what burn down chart does. So here's the question for this video. Do you have an example for a generally accepted Scrum practice that your team uses? And when you answer, you are also going to basically embolden your understanding of GASP. So definitely drop your answer in the comments below. So that's all that we had in this video. I hope you got value out of it and you were able to understand what generally accepted Scrum practices are. Smash that like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And don't forget to check out the website pmclounge.com, your number one free PMP resource. If you like our work, consider contributing at pmclounge.com/contribute. Thank you.